being able to look past the details of the moment, being like, okay, Paul just went for this crazy play and died. But within the larger context, of these games, whether it be RTS games or MOBAs or hey, Demon Dev here. Been a little while. Mostly, I have been writing, working on one of my novels, which is a mecha sci-fi thriller romance book that I've been putting on chapters on Royal Road. So if you're interested in any of that, you should totally check it out, and I'll link it below. Anyways, I had a really powerful memory earlier today. I was thinking about contradiction theory, one of my more controversial videos, which is briefly the idea the more you can handle in terms of distance between what you believe and what you do is a kind of a mental health metric for how happy you are or can be. But seeking backwards into my past a little bit, I had a girlfriend in college that I used to play League of Legends with, and I was at least among the friend group, I was either one of the better or one of the best players. Not that I was very disciplined with League of Legends, super aggressive, usually top or ADC or support. But anyways, I ended up in a shot caller position a lot, and at one point I said a pretty wild thing, which in a way was maybe even prophetic into the current day with some of my videos like contradiction theory and other stuff, which is basically even when I'm wrong, I'm right. Is something I said, which sparked an argument, and I said it to more than one person. But one time I said it to my girlfriend in college, and she really didn't like that. And I argued with her about it for a little bit, though I hadn't thought it through quite as much as I think I needed to win points persuasively. But the core logic of it, I think, still stands, which is basically when you've got team games, like everyone's going clown fiesta, deathmatch, whether it's pushing for towers or just, kind of chasing people in the jungle in League of Legends, you do want some degree of executive power. You want somebody to be able to make a call. Okay, let's go. Let's all go in. Everyone's hiding in the bush. It's like, okay, who's going to make the first move? All coming out against like a random enemy that's wandering around or looking for you guys. Like you gotta make a move. And I always thought that playing in general more aggressively, trying to take risks, pays off, especially at the lower ranks. I think that the highest rank I ever got in League of Legends, ladder wise, was like Diamond 4 when I was pretty much try harding as hard as I could. I've never been that disciplined. Like I used to play a lot of RTS games. So like with StarCraft 2, the highest I ever got was Master. Never got to Grandmaster, and I never got to Challenger in League of Legends for sure. But that's still, especially within a local friend group in college, that's still like top 5% or maybe higher than that, like of all players. So I definitely knew something of what I was doing. But the problem is when you play more aggressive, when you're going for those risks. When you're going for those risks, it does mean that if you make a bad call, that it can be pretty catastrophic. Of course, whether there's any kind of balanced way to measure how many of your calls were right or not can be hard to say. But generally, if you're one of the better players in the group, people tend to have some sort of trust or just kind of go with it. You're kind of all in. So when I said something as inflammatory as like, well, even when I'm wrong, I'm right. Really what I was saying is you got to trust my judgment at the end of the day. 9 times out of 10, maybe even 10 times out of 10, if I say we're going in, we should go in and I need you to give it everything. I can't have you holding back and then I go in by myself. And if I'm the strongest player on the team and if we had, more kills or any kills, a lot of times they were on me. So I had a lot of the resources of the team. Then I need people to back me up if they're there. Ultimately, at least in like the full 5-man team groups, I could not necessarily get people to go around along with my plans. And other people, wanted to do their own thing too. It's not all about like, oh, everyone sacrificed for the win, which, especially if you're on the upper side of the team, usually you're having a great time and the people who are worse on the team are having a worse time, and it balances out so that I get somebody to punish and other people are losing lane in exchange, in a kind of equilibrium sense, and with how like ELO works and all that. But the interesting thought that I was having as far as tie-ins go, like with contradiction theory now, and even when I'm wrong, I'm right back then, is basically being able to look past the being able to look past the details of the moment, being like, okay, Paul just went for this crazy play and died, but within the larger context, of these games, whether it be RTS games or MOBAs or whatever else, if he is, good at this game and should be generally trusted, maybe not everybody needs to be in a quarterback position. If I make a bad call, then the responsibility is on me. Like, Paul made a bad call, but it's not like, oh, I need to second guess every call that Paul makes, is one way to do it. And I did have a lot of dynamics, especially people that I played like ranked duos with, where they'd be just like, you know what? Paul's crazy, takes a lot of risks, but especially at the lower ranks, kind of until you get to Diamond, taking tons of risks really pays off because you can snowball and kind of carry the whole thing. Otherwise, you're, in my opinion, way too dependent on people on your team not screwing up, which just makes climbing harder, I think. Whereas if you can really carry by being aggressive and pushing for like the max victories, like just totally taunting and like just being under their tower and bullying the crap out of the other team. One, that's one of the most enjoyable ways to play that game, and I really enjoyed that too. So there's some bias there, but I think, it's like gambling on, all in on 7 black, and then you win it, and then you do it again and again. That's what it feels like when the enemy's coming back in the lane and dying again. And sometimes the biggest reward is it makes them actually quit the game, and then that demoralizes the rest of the team. So there really can be a obviously huge advantage from playing super aggressive, and it's very easy to criticize that. And I definitely got a lot of criticism too. But from a like socially trying to enjoy myself and have fun, I kind of remained all in on I'm just going to keep playing aggressively. And if, the person that I'm laning with, whether I'm in the bottom with like a support or being a support for an ADC, if they're with that, then awesome. If they're not, then I can go do my own thing. And over time, I move towards being more of a top laner, because that gives you a lot more autonomy and a lot less like coordination. You don't need to be on the same page so much with the rest of the team. In fact, a lot of times you'll do better, again, especially in the lower ranks, until you're like in Diamond. At least that was my experience like 10 years ago. So it's been a while, but the point being, moving towards that more independent role is something that I went towards when I realized that it wasn't making it fun, or I wasn't able to effectively convince people enough to go with my judgment. So I stopped fighting the fight on that. And in a way, there's a contradiction theory there thing too, because really what I was feeling is like, okay, here's a way for us to win. If I'm playing with a couple different people, is generally listen to my guidance and judgment. No, I'm not always going to be right, but I'm going to be right statistically more than everyone else by a lot, and take a lot of the pressure off. I think the sort of the mismatch contradiction that I was noticing back then is a lot of people didn't want to go with my plan, which is totally fine, but also hated being in the decision chair themselves, being blamed for bad calls or whatever. So a big part of me was, wanting to solve all the problems and be like, okay, we'll just generally go with what I'm saying. And then if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And if I'm right, I'm right. And, don't feel too bad. Like, just try to have fun with all the other parts that a lot of people do like to do. And to some degree that worked, to some degree it didn't. I'm not even saying I would necessarily change anything. I'm just noticing that it was an interesting pattern that I had even discovered back then with playing games where I knew back then it wasn't all about winning, which is why when people, didn't want to go with me or wanted me to play different styles, like whether it was like less aggressive or in different roles, I wasn't necessarily going to be like, well, this isn't going to give us the most wins. Like whatever people wanted to do, these were friends, not esports teammates. So it really wasn't all about winning. In fact, some of the most favorite games that I ever played with those group of people in college and some online friends that I'd never met in real life was where everything would be going crazy and, coming back from a huge loss. So it wasn't even like the more optimized winning oriented strategies were even the most fun. Some of the most painful games is where we would start out crushing or I would be snowballing and get kind of bored or sloppy and lazy because I, wasn't having that challenge. So doesn't really matter about the wins and losses, but what did matter to me then, and I spent a ton of time thinking about, and obviously continue to as I think about now, is basically having the most fun and other people having the most fun, and wondering not just how can I help other people have the most fun, but are there any like not fun parts, like whether it's responsibility for macro decision making or the aggressiveness of certain plays, like are we going to tower dive or not? Is there a way for me to take that off the shoulders of other people so that even if I'm wrong, they can have fun, or even if I'm taking too many risks, that's like not like gonna be a deal breaker in terms of ruining people's nights. So, ultimately you can't control it. And those kinds of social risks, like are other people going to think I'm good? If Paul drags me down, is that going to reflect poorly on me, or is that just going to be all on him? And, the opposite is true too. If it goes really well, am I going to get credit, or is Paul going to get all the credit? All of those things, and thinking of, everyone's done this where you pick certain champions to kind of help a friend do extra good. So I think those kinds of conversations and like just internal inquiries can be super satisfying. And it reminds me of sort of where contradiction theory came from, which was just noticing that it is super complicated to talk to people, and an interesting challenge. Like it's not just about discussing what you're discussing, but the meta commentary within that. How does it feel to try to convince people to like listen to you? To like consciously become aware of, I don't agree with what Paul's saying or doing in this game, but I'm going to go with it anyways. And that easily extends into real life and relationships as well. How much do you want to, divvy up responsibilities or decision, making judgment calls about, anything you're doing day to day or long term, where do you want to put your decision making? And it's not even necessarily like an elo thing or a trust or like, okay, who's most likely to be right? Sometimes it's actually just like a like energy bandwidth sort of thing. Like I just need this decision to be on somebody else so that like I'm not dealing with the stress and heartache of trying to decide stuff. Like even simple stuff like food. It's not like you can necessarily assign it to one person, but you could lean towards it. You could say, okay, this person usually makes the right calls on food, so we're just going to kind of give them default privilege. And if the other person feels strongly, they can go cook their own thing or do their own thing. But otherwise, it's like assumed we're just going to go with that person's plan. Certain things like that, or even for stretches of time as a sort of like optimization, or even like creative exploration, it's interesting to me. Not everything has to be like a crazy nested flowchart strategy, but I do feel in the modern age, there is such a suffering from needing everything to be an individualized decision, when a lot of us would like to make less micro decisions all the time. And if there was somebody already there next to us or like in it with us for like so much stuff. And we wanted them to kind of make those decisions anyways. Maybe they could just go for it. It's funny. I mentioned food with the implication that I want somebody else to make the decision, but I actually like, deciding what's for dinner and taking charge of all that. So that's an interesting thing. Like, the idea of me basically deciding like, okay, here's what you're eating. And they can, of course, say no or do anything else, but just having that as a default rather than starting at negotiation from ground one every single time. Like, what about this? What about this? Just like, no, I'm doing this. And it needs like a significant like counter reaction to be like, actually, no, don't make me something for that. I like the acceleration and the velocity of it. I think there's a lot of things that I wish had a more automatic decision speed to it. Like, well, of course, this is what I'm going to do. And it's the exception to the rule to like override, rethink, and personalize a, decision for a very common occurrence, every single day. Like having a go-to type snack lately, raw eggs have been one of the go-tos that I went to. It's just like, okay, if I'm hungry and I don't feel like cooking anything, boom, problem solved. Not that I'll always do that, but one example of many where, having a default decision maker or like, at least for a period of time, thing that you can do can be super powerful and take a lot of the mental strain off. I think that's kind of an era thing for me is how do I take, the 1,000 decisions that are kind of like default baked into the day and skip over a lot of those, or like Persona, when you can just hit fast forward mode and you're just auto using melee. Like when you can get into a rhythm where you're already doing things without having to decide to, like routines and systems and just kind of daily habits and things like that, can be super powerful. Yeah, and I think that can work socially as well. So yeah, even sometimes when I'm wrong, I'm right. Maybe we just go crazy clown fiesta, super aggressively, and it's less about winning or losing even, and more just like, it's not statistically, it's not a bad call to just go with Paul's calls on this. So let's just do it. Not that it has to be that way. It could be the total opposite, which is I don't care about winning. I want my own KDA to be all right. So I'm not going to do what Paul's saying, which is totally fine. And then I can orient my strategy around that, go top lane, do my own thing, and keep an eye on the map and see if I want to join people without it being like a coordinated strategy from my point, which is what I fell into, I think, over time, which I think worked really well. And it also kind of segmented some of the friend group too, because there'd just be some people that I would ladder with and some people that I wouldn't. And maybe that was sort of a natural macro decision thing too. It's just like, well, I don't want to be in this situation where I'm forced to, go along with or not go along with certain strategies and then deal with the reputation ramifications, I guess. Fair enough. I think a lot of my reflections on contradiction theory and echoes from the past is basically there's a lot of options and you got to pick whatever you're picking in the moment and then reflect on it and see if that is a strategy that you want to continue. Anyways, have a good one. I'm going to be back to doing more game development stuff. I've been messing around with Unreal Engine recently. I will continue work on Double Demons for sure, but there is a bit of a recruitment situation going on there, so I want to finalize some of my changes to the team before I'm really back in on that all the time. And I want to finish my book, Duelers. It's a mecha sci-fi thriller romance book that I'm putting out chapter by chapter on Royal Road, so please check it out. I would love to hear, comment below what you think of it. And about halfway through at around 30,000 words, I think, so far. So there's a good bit of story there. Huge on the psychological aspect and relationship inner monologues, as is one of my favorite things to talk about, obviously, from this channel. So go check it out. if that interests you at all, and have a good one.